they'd say it was in energy, and we were actually developing new energy sources. But in fact, we seem to be spending most of our time trying not to scare people in terms of the new disruptive technology we're looking at here, which is really to protect infrastructure and networks from attack from a variety of sources. And this has been, as you know, ramping up quickly if you've been watching the news. I'll walk through some of the types of attacks that we're seeing. But what I really want to do here is focus on Zanttz as a company, where we're headed. I know we have some investors in the audience, so I'll look at it from an investment perspective, also look at the product and how the product is being ramped out, and then also look at the implication from the standpoint of the customers who are using it. And I'll try and do that in the context of the theme tonight, which is really about energy and energy infrastructure. That's not really our primary focus, energy infrastructure, but it is actually a segment that we've seen a lot of interest in. There are a lot of early adopters that are approaching us from the energy side, and also what I call the resource side. When I say resource, I mean like oil and gas resources, areas like that. And so I'll try and focus on that when I can and show some of the examples that we're seeing coming from those industry areas. And also focus on the broader industry segments as I walk through it. So why don't perfect. So we are considered a new category, which is active threat deception. And this is very quickly the why, the how, the what of what Zanttz is. And Zanttz is first and foremost a company that's focused on advanced persistent threats. So these are targeted attacks that actually are going after networks and resources for a number of different purposes. And the key point here is when they attack, they get by your perimeter defenses, they get by your endpoints, and they actually live on the networks. And they can live on the networks for very extended periods of time. And this is when they become very dangerous, and they can have very large impact on whoever's being attacked. And so what do you do when one of these attacks actually bypasses your perimeter securing your endpoint? What do you do when it's actually sitting there living on your network and you don't know it? Okay? And that's what we're focused on. So how do we do this? So what we're doing actually is taking two technology, as was mentioned, that we developed with the Defense Department as well as a couple of other agencies in the Navy. And this was a technology that combines two things: software-defined networking, which is becoming a popular topic, and I'll go into that a little bit here, as a market space, as well as network virtualization. These are technologies that we patented on the military side, doing that type of work, taking knowledge from that, and we have on the order of 20 patents right now in that area. And I'll walk through that in some detail, but we're basically taking that and applying that to attacks on networks. And in terms of the what, we're developing a commercial product that is going to be released shortly here. And the product is directed at, one, detecting APTs on the network. Not only just detecting them, but actually hiding critical resources and helping to protect those resources, those things that you care most about. And finally, it has a quarantine capability, which we're going into it, which allows you to actually quarantine the attackers, study them, and actually figure out what they're after, and eventually contain them. So that's, in a nutshell, what we're about. And if we go to a little bit of background here on Zanttz. So Zanttz, as a company, as I said, started off in the U.S. government space. I come from the U.S. government side, so it was natural. And traditionally, it's done cyber warfare training. That was its main task. And in doing that, it actually emulated networks for military purposes, where you can actually go through and on one blade, basically put together the network that you want dynamically, put together the actual systems on that network, and not only that, you can actually have the behaviors that you want in that network. So things do things as they normally would on an operating production network. So these are operationally realistic networks. And they're used for cyber training. So your best cyber experts get in there and they interact with the system and they actually try to work with attacks that are coming through it, and it's a great training ground. Extremely realistic, and it means that we can do it all on one blade. So there was a lot of knowledge that was gained in developing networks like this and being able to essentially dynamically generate them. And it's that technology and that knowledge that was actually transferred back to create the patents for what we're doing now with the product line. All right, so let me turn to the market opportunity. Most of you know this. Attacks are going up dramatically. So back in the 2000s and so on, most of the attacks were fairly straightforward. There were viruses that spread. They were the kiddie scripts that were out there as teenagers you heard about attacked and got into different government networks and so forth. Not extremely sophisticated, fairly basic by today's standards. And what we've seen is a rapid uptick of activity. And so now, this was as of 2010, you can see that the attack rate went up, but more importantly, it went up in sophistication. There are a number of different targets, and in terms of the techniques used, you're talking about payloads that actually detonate within networks and destroy them, and that's ramped up dramatically. You're seeing espionage, the stealing of documents and information and critical information for companies and infrastructure, as well as criminal organizations that are making a very large profit off of going after banking sites and other areas like this. And in fact, the reason for the large ramp up is because there's actually an illicit software market that now is building up very quickly and actually provides, almost like the commercial market, smaller, but like the commercial market, it's growing to support these attacks. And what you're seeing is the most advanced attackers, which tend to either be on the nation state or the criminal organization side, those tactics are actually being recycled very quickly into these kind of illicit product markets, and they're going to the attackers that are on the lower end of the spectrum. So you're seeing advanced tools actually going back towards attacks and ramping up rapidly and becoming very effective as a result. So that time period of which technology transfers down to your everyday attacker is getting shorter and shorter, and that's creating more and more of a danger to infrastructure and networks across the globe. And you can just look at some of the recent attacks. RSA was attacked following the Aurora attacks on Google and Morgan Stanley and others. Following the RSA attack, that led to numerous attacks on contractors. Northrop Grumman and others were involved in attacks, as well as L3 and Lockheed, where critical IP was stolen. And if you actually go in and look at the reports that came out when they found the command and control servers going back to the attackers, they found out that about 760 networks were phoning back home to those command and control centers. Many of them commercial, some were ISPs, but many were commercial. 20% were Fortune 100s. Some of that was infrastructure. Key point here is these APTs are on the insides of many networks right now living. And they stay for extended periods of time, and they're a large threat. And literally it's keeping executives and chief risk officers up at night these days, because they don't know. So just in terms of critical infrastructure, a little bit of an idea of what you're seeing in terms of the overall impact. First, let me just say, if you look at what General Alexander has said from NSA, he's trying to put some summary of what the damages are. He estimates damages at about $1 trillion right now due to these cyber attacks. He calls it the greatest transfer of wealth in history. In terms of the IP that's been lost and everything else, $250 billion in IP lost. If you look at the recent Saudi Aramco attacks, we just got back from the Middle East because of interest in the technology. And Saudi Aramco was recently hit. 75% of their workstations were taken down. This was targeted at all of their production facilities. It actually never made it to production, but it did take down 75% of their workstation. Again, or their workstations. Again, 30,000 computers. It was detonated with a timer, so it occurred across the company at once. All systems went down. Data was destroyed on all those systems, so they had to, where they did have backup, replenish it, and a burning American flag was actually put up on the screen of each of those workstations when they went down. Night Dragon was another one that actually came around. That's been propagated through Canada. We're still seeing effects of it, and we have a number of initial customers who are dealing with that. Night Dragon was an attack on oil and gas companies across Canada, and it basically was targeted at IP around resource negotiations. Let's put it that way. So when you're actually negotiating deals for resources, information, let's say on bids and things like that, were actually stolen and in some cases used back in those negotiations against them. And so again, you can see that there's a lot of money to be made in these attacks if you get the right information from the right people. This was targeted at CEOs, and it eventually propagated from their web servers, email servers, back in their laptops, back to the CEOs themselves and their laptops. Finally, the cyber attack on gas pipelines recently. You can see the 23 natural gas pipeline operators were attacked somewhat separately, and there's information stolen on the gas compressor stations. And if you think about the time bomb, aspect of the Saudi Aramco attacks, it starts to become a little scary in terms of what might happen. So we're seeing a lot of interest just in terms of infrastructure. The other one that we're seeing on water, we have been asked to come into desalination plants in the Middle East. They supply over 90% of clean water going into the population, and they have been seeing attacks coming across those. All right, so a little bit about the Zanttz approach. So how do we handle this problem, and what can we do that's disruptive? Because right now, clearly, current security practices are not doing very well in terms of protecting against these type of attacks. So the easiest way to think about this, we like to think about like a house. So you have your house, and you basically are going to put up your firewalls, you're going to lock the doors, you're going to have your gateways that protect it. You're going to have anti-malware devices, antivirus on the outside of the house. And inside you're going to put in intrusion protection systems. So you got your motion detectors, right? In the networks you have your intrusion detection systems, which are actually looking for movements within the network itself. But just like houses, you get a high false alarm rate. It's always going off. Very difficult to actually figure out what's going on, what's a real threat or what's not. And so our approach is different than standard security technologies. And in fact, what we do is we basically create an operationally realistic network of essentially false houses that appear within your network. And in essence, we increase the surface area of what you might attack, and these houses look really nice. You know, they have the gold vase in the window. They look like they're a good target. They look like a nice SCADA system that might take down a good part of your infrastructure if you were actually to get inside of it. And so you can create these in a very operational, realistic way, and we detect. Second, we basically use our software-defined networking, which allows us to, in a way, play with networking in software, and it allows us to actually hide and protect, which means that we can create and reassemble the furniture inside those houses on the fly. We can create new rooms as you walk through, and as you open new doors, you actually see different areas as we present it to an attacker. And similar to the Matrix, where you saw the black cat, black cat would come across and say "déjà vu," and suddenly the house, the whole landscape would change, and they'd know that something was different. We spent a lot of money removing that black cat from our software. So in fact, it will change, and when they go through the door, things will be different. And as a result, we have the ability to basically draw them in, contain and inspect them. And the important thing about this is once they're in, let's say they're going after the SCADA system, are they in with a payload? Do they want to detonate it? Or do they want to steal your IP? Do they want to steal blueprints, maps, configurations, whatever? We have the ability to basically see what they're rummaging through. Because we're actually creating the environment, we're creating the networks, we can actually see what they're targeting in terms of what they're searching or where they land their payloads. And so this allows us to study them and understand what their intent is. So let's see. We also do this at extremely large scale. And so we can do this across extremely large corporate networks. And we can provide just a huge surface area that should at least increase the cost of an attacker who's coming into it. So that's conceptually what we're doing. In terms of the actual product, we have our version 1.0, which is a minimum viable product. There's a lot of interest in it. It's coming out in June, so it'll be out this next month. We have top-level customers, the early adopters, so to speak, that are in government. We have a couple that are in the commercial space, financial, and then a couple that are in the critical infrastructure area. And so they'll be testing it, validating it, feeding it back to us. Again, we're doing a crawl, walk, run strategy. We're not going to throw this into the largest enterprise networks right off the bat. And actually, as we get into the fall, we'll have our 2.0. This is where we'll be lining up customers. So those who are operating critical infrastructure want to actually use this, try it out. And if there are people in the room here, I don't know if we have any people who are actually operating protections within facilities, but come and see me if you are interested, because as we enter the fall, we'll be lining up customers who can try this out and feedback how it's operating to us. So in terms of competitive, turning a little more to the investor side and those others who might be running security, how do we sit within the competitive environment of other security products? Well, you have your standard architecture. You have your firewalls, your anti-malware devices that all sit along the gateway at the top of the network, and then you have your endpoints. You have your antivirus engines, your Norton, your more advanced antivirus that are run. And where we actually operate and fit in is within the network itself. So in effect, this isn't really a competitive chart. What it's showing is we're very complementary to almost every other security product out there. There's really no one else operating in this space that we're moving into. And so in essence, if they make it through the firewalls, they make it through all the other protections, what I call the British soldiers that are lined up, we're there to basically absorb them and understand what they're up to. And the beauty of this is we can actually communicate alerts back up to the integrated alerting system, and we communicate what we're finding. So we will actually see, for instance, if they're calling back to command and control, we'll actually see the command and control servers that they're communicating back to, and we can communicate that via interface right up to Palo Alto Networks or Cisco or others who are operating security there. So it's a very synergistic environment. It's very much about not stepping on others' toes. Not a good thing as we're coming out, and we think that's good for customers. It's good for partnerships with other security companies, and in effect, it's good for mergers and acquisitions as we start to get going and start to get into our further releases. So, why is there so much excitement right now? Why is there so much popularity around the product that we're providing? Well, part of it comes from the fact that we sit at the intersection of two different technologies, two different markets. One is the network security. We talked about the attacks, how they're bypassing perimeter security, how they're living on the networks, and how current security products just aren't meeting the need. And so you have a lot of new categories of products coming out. You've probably heard of a few of them. You have Palo Alto Networks, you have FireEye. These are all the guys that sit with us. And I know we said we were in Washington. We're actually transferring our offices now. We have about 10 staff in Santa Clara. We sit right next to Palo Alto Networks now. We have only a few people left in Washington. We will be transferring our offices down here shortly. And we share the parking lot with Palo Alto, actually, down in Santa Clara. Not by design. And so you have a lot of these new categories of software coming up. Mykonos is another one. Mykonos is very important to us because they are a company that did some basic deception work on websites. So they actually created for websites, those sites operate on the web, a deceptive capability that actually pulled attackers in and played with them a bit, understood if they were attacking, and kind of led them down pathways that only attackers would go down. So they could figure them out pretty quickly. They were able to map out the command and control. And very early in their life cycle, they were actually acquired for $80 million at about 25 times their revenue. So this is a good space to be in. It's very inquisitive. We are a new category that's coming up in this, and so it's a good market to be operating in. But at the same time, having said that, we're also operating software-defined networking. Software-defined networking, if network security is hot, is becoming almost hotter. I don't know how much you guys have been tracking this, but basically, software-defined networking allows you, instead of in hardware, to basically do your networking almost completely in software. It allows you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you network. And so there are a number of companies out there that are trying to basically recreate Cisco and Juniper, but in software. And this is considered the next big play. Nicira, which came out with basically just beta software in the software-defined networking area, was acquired by VMware for $1.26 billion at 100 times their revenue. And this, again, this was on basically beta software that was coming out. So basically, we are operating with software-defined networking. We're operating with the patents in that area that we brought in from our military work. And we're bringing that together with the network security side. We think this is a very, very nice place to be sitting in terms of an exit as we actually go through and release the product. And so there is a lot of excitement about what we're doing, and we have had a lot of inquiries. A little bit on our financing. So in 2011, we stood up. We basically had $2 million, just short of $2 million in seed funding. And actually, Crosslink Capital, just a few blocks from here, was the lead on that. Since then, we basically been positioning ourselves for an A round as we come into late 2013 here. And so again, that's planned for the fall. Right now, we've been operating off of a $3 million convertible note. And we've just oversubscribed that because of the interest in it. We have gone back because there has been so much interest, and we've got permission to be able to oversubscribe a bit on that note. It wasn't difficult to do. So we are still accepting some investment against that. We have $5 million, basically new money planned for this A round. $3 million already committed. And then in terms of the use of funds, the convertible note obviously is going towards the 1.0 minimum viable product release, and it's going to the validation of that, and then ramping into the launch of 2.0, and the A round will go into 2.0 this fall. It's release late fall, and then the 3.0 release, which comes up in this 2014 mid-year. Okay, and that's when we actually go mass market. That's when we're going for broad distribution across a whole range of different industries. And so there are still opportunities. We are still accepting small investments on a convertible note if you're a smaller investor. Than larger investors, main thing is just be aware. We're going A round as we go into the end of the year here. We have all of our initial seed round investors who have committed to the A round, which is very nice. Actually, the only thing we're doing right now is looking for a good lead on that round who can actually price it. So that's the final piece that we're working through right now as we go into late fall. Another note, we are taking a crawl, walk, run approach to this, and so we have lined up a series of system integrators. We have one system integrator in the energy and critical infrastructure area. We have another system integrator who's operating in essentially the commercial space and one in the defense space. And so we have 3 system integrators, the idea being that we're going to let the system integrators actually pull us into the customers. And each of those are customers first and foremost. They're using the product themselves, and then they will use it and actually pull along the system integration to other clients that they have. And that's a key part of our strategy as we move out. So.